Hello and welcome to a show that you can now hear on devices of your choosing. That show is Radio Free Nintendo. I am James Jones. I'm joined today by Mr. Guillaume Vayette.
Good evening.
Mr. Greg Leahy.
Ahoy, ahoy, everyone.
And Mr. John Lindemann.
You know, James, I was afraid I was going to miss this week's show because I was on a darkness retreat, but fortunately...
Did you make a decision about your retirement yet?
Not quite yet.
Oh, okay.
There's a little bit more darkness to go.
We're about to record RFN. There's always more darkness to go. It is February 16th, 2023, and this is episode 810, which seems wild, but here we are. Somebody pointed out in the Discord that we talked about Pikmin 4 for the first time on episode 444. So that's pretty cool. That was around the time Miyamoto gave the interview where he said it was almost done. 444.
Wow.
810.
Yeah.
So that's neat. We are going to jump into some listener mail. Last week we did the direct. Week before that we did some new business plus our games of 2022, which I got wrong. And our podcast feed is fixed. So now you can hear this, which is great. So, big thanks to the NWR tech team. So they managed to figure out what was wrong with it. I should probably ask just so I know this for the future, but reasons. We're going to get right into email, and I'm going to go ahead and decide that, I'll just look through the email, see who I want to read what. John, would you read the first email? I should not read this one, which is why I'm having you read it.
I don't know what that means, but let's go for it.
I am brought up specifically, so it'd be weird to talk about myself in the third person.
All right. Underscore PPKO writes, congrats on not having Google Podcasts block this week's episode, guys.
Hey, we did it.
I'd like to bring up an ultimately insignificant problem I have with video game review scores. Insignificant.
Here it comes.
We only
insignificant,
our
I
currency
cut a paragraph and a half out of the email.
Our currency is significance, but I'll entertain this one for the moment.
It's true. You're right. That's our metric.
For the last couple of weeks, a statement James made regarding game review scores has been on my mind. Man, that is a terrible outcome.
So hold on. That means my statement was significant.
I
don't know about that. Sometimes you could just listen to what is obviously a really kind of, dubious in terms of creative merit, like a song or like a jingle in an ad, and it can get stuck in your head. So,
yeah, but is it the act of it being stuck in your head an event that has caused you to genuflect your thinking?
I mean,
I would say that creates its significance.
It could be significant in its insignificance. Think about it.
Deep. That's deep.
He said he's never played a game that he would call a 10 out of 10. Be it for rating video games and movies or restaurants and services, I've heard this sentiment plenty. Oh, I don't give perfect scores, or how could this get a perfect score when negatives are mentioned in the review? Personally, I think this is a bad attitude. Why bother having 10
show you a bad attitude
as a possible score when it would never be used? It's like people considering each single digit score, 1 through 9, a range of quality, while a 10 is an infinitely small, unattainable pinpoint. This is just wrong. If James has never played a 10, as defined by NWR's outline, I'd say this reflects poorly on the website. In my opinion, a perfect score is not intended for a perfect game, but for those amongst the very best games. Moreover, why are there so few games that get ratings below a 5? Looking at Metacritic's Switch games from the last 90 days with at least 7 reviews, 27 games in total, the average Metascore is 75.2 and the lowest Metascore is 54. Sure, we just got Metroid Prime to bump up the average, but on the other end of the spectrum, we have Smurfs Kart. Maybe this is too small a sample to be empirical evidence, but it looks about right compared to what I've witnessed over the years. Most games are rated around 75%, as where 55% would be the true average if the entire range of 1 to 10 was honestly considered by review outlets. Problem or not, this is clearly an industry-wide trend. Do you think more review outlets should be brave enough to stretch their legs and award more 10s and sub 5s? Or should we just be content with the status quo? Thank you for all that you do.
I feel like I have the right to respond first, but I'm not. I'm going to save
you're
that.
living in this guy's head rent free, so please
I'm going
address
to
that.
save that for a second, and I want to point out that getting 7 reviews on your game for Switch is actually kind of hard because there's so many fucking games that come out.
Yeah,
and
we've mentioned this before on related topics in terms of yes, you could talk about leniency bias, which of course is what is being PPKO is kind of supposing here, that people are just unwilling, they're not brave enough to go below 5.
Cowards.
They are too lenient. It's leniency bias, but a lot of it actually is selection bias at work.
Correct.
In terms of, as you mentioned, there are so many games, and the outlets don't nearly have enough bandwidth to cover them all, so they pre-select the ones that they think will be interesting to their audience, and oftentimes those are, obviously it's an imperfect process. It doesn't mean you're going to be right when you make these decisions, but you allocate resources broadly where you think, the readers of your site want to go. And a lot of the times that is going to at least somewhat correlate with quality of the game, something about the game anyway that makes it interesting, and always all about quality. But again, there's some sort of correlation there. So, I wouldn't discount that there's a certain amount of leniency bias at work, but there's certainly more to it than that.
Yeah, the reality of the situation is some weeks on Switch, 20 games will come out, 25 games, 30 games, and it's multifaceted. So we don't get review codes for every game, which means somebody's going to have to pay for that game with their own fucking money.
Yep.
And the games that we don't get review codes for are usually much smaller, and so they don't get a ton of attention, and they have much less resources. I'm literally just opening up what's come out on Switch most recently. Theatrhythm, Eldrand, Big Adventure: Trip to Europe 2 Collector's Edition. I'm going to say this game probably doesn't have 7 reviews on Metacritic. I'm going to say that this game is probably not above a 5. It's probably below a 5. But I'm just going to put this one image in the chat, and I just want you all to react. That's it. Just need you to react. I don't need you to give it a lot of thought. Don't need you to overthink it. Just immediate gut response to what I just put in the chat. My gut response is, Jesus! But that's a real game. Allegedly. I like the stock photo families over the weird photoshopped, just like generically Central European vista they've created. With a road that doesn't seem to go anywhere. And yeah, this is obviously not a, well, obviously, I don't know. This is quite likely not a good product.
I like the fact that it's the collector's edition, implying that there's a normal edition, but that there's people actually collecting these games.
Yeah, this digital game.
There's a lot of interesting implications there that presumably don't go anywhere.
I'm just trying to figure out like who the woman's face reminds me of. Like, is it Benny Hill?
In drag, yes. Yes.
Okay.
That's what that is. There's a game in here called Psychophonies. What Ghosts Say. And it's just pictures of ghosts with text selection prompts, as near as I can tell.
That's it. When you're talking about these sorts of low rent, kind of operations, you see, there's actually a sort of another way in which selection bias works. In terms of, it's not just the outlets choosing what they cover, but it's also that these sorts of games are not going to choose to push their game to reviewers even a lot of the time, because they're operating on thin margins. That's the business model, and outreach is not part of that.
Outreach is the enemy.
That you just get it out there at the lowest cost possible, with some sort of wording or some sort of feature that you think will ensnare enough people to actually push purchase that it will end up covering the costs or whatever. So yeah, the point is there's multiple factors that go into why you would not expect reasonably the games that actually show up on Metacritic, as you mentioned, because they've got to be a certain amount of reviews to reach that threshold. And I mean, they've got to make a page for it in the first place. That's right. Even if it hasn't got like the number of reviews, like it's going to have a page, and therefore we shouldn't expect those statistics you mentioned about the scores to reflect the full range, because it doesn't. It's not all there. It's been de facto selected for Metacritic by the outlets choosing to cover, the publishers and developers choosing whether they even bother doing critical outreach or not. Metacritic itself obviously has a role in the way it does things. So it is, obviously it's very broad, but it is on some level somewhat curated, kind of selection of games. So it should be really no surprise that it skews higher.
And he cites, I had to redact part of the email for time, a thing on Metacritic's own site where they noted that the color bands are different for games versus movies. The quality
based on the ways that those media are scored differently by the critics involved. Yeah.
But I'll point out two things. One, movie reviewers don't review the equivalent of Box Roulette Simulator - Boxing Battle Fight for Combat Nintendo Switch, which is a real game on Switch. But if they do, it only takes them an hour and 20 minutes to watch the movie versus a game, which obviously takes more time usually. I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess I can review Boxing Roulette Simulator faster, but still.
Some of these things might be even quicker than a movie, frankly.
Right. But, They also don't review the bottom of the barrel. Now, there are, like Troma, who make deliberately awful movies, and they send them out for a critical review because they want that review that just savages them. But as somebody who spent, 10 years with a group of friends deliberately seeking out the worst movies we could get our hands on, most of them didn't have critical reviews because they're independent productions in the worst possible way. They are like, a guy or a woman thought I could be a movie star and I've got a little bit of money, so I'm going to write, star, direct, produce, and in some cases even create the music for my film. And this happens more than you'd expect. And those movies don't get reviewed. If those movies got reviewed, they would set the floor of the score. They would be so far down that everything else would get bumped up by a point or two in and of itself, because I've seen those movies.
But the thing is, they do still exist, don't they? And people have still seen movies like them. So if you ask them to score other movies, like, they still kind of take them into account somewhat, don't you? Know what I mean? Like, you might never have reviewed something that you'd give 1 out of 10, possibly, but you've seen things that you'd give 1 out of 10. So you it's still there. You don't effectively chop it off the end of the low end of the scale,
And I think that's the other reason why we don't see reviewers use the very, very bottom of the scores. NWR standard is basically like, if your game boots and I can play it, we're probably going to give you a 1. At a minimum. Like, that's like, okay, I can play your game. We've made it past 0. Congratulations, you did it. But like that's really not exactly like a sparkling depiction. I've actually given 2 or 3 1s in the past. Because I got stuck with a lot of garbage. John can speak to that. He saw it firsthand.
Terrible.
I reviewed like 4 or 5 2s. And the thing is, I don't give out a 1 or a 2 very easily because, all right, so this is 1 and 10 have the same.
Was it you that reviewed Homie's Rollers?
No, that was Zach.
That was Zach.
James reviewed Cake Ninja 2 on DSiWare, so that was a 1.
Ginger Dead Man or
Ninja Bread Man.
I was trying to think
Ninja Bread. No,
that's a movie.
Ninja Bread Man.
Ninja Bread Man.
Yeah,
the site gave it more than a 1. That's all I can say.
Because it's a Ginger Dead Man is the thing with Gary Busey.
Yes. So Ninja Bread Man should be more than a 1 because they repackaged that game 3 times. They had chances to fix it. That game was sold 3 different times with just different texture pack on top. I gave Cake Ninja a 1 because it was worse than Fruit Ninja on phones, which was free. It was really truly terrible to look at, and it didn't do anything of redeeming value. And so here when I say I haven't played a game I gave a 10, I had 2 conversations with reviews editor John Lindemann about games as 10s. 2. One of them was Ghost Trick, which I gave a 9.5, and one of them was Super Mario
Galaxy 2.
Galaxy 2, yeah.
What did I say?
What about Radiant Astoria? I felt like you got close on that, maybe as well.
Yeah, it did. I think it was a 9.5.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
But I knew I had issues with that game. So like it got a 9.5 in spite of the issues I had with that game. It's
sure.
The battles against actually I just gave it a flat 9. The battles against standard enemies often took longer than the boss fights, and the boss fights took too long.
I've heard that said about the game, not just by you, but it still kind of makes me laugh to think about.
And if you think that's petty, I want you to understand you'll fight hundreds of these
it's
fights.
An RPG. I mean, it's easy for anybody who's played them to imagine that just doesn't add up. It's not proportional.
Right. But again, I want to make it clear. The random enemies take longer than the boss fights, and as I said, is the second part of that phrase. And the boss fights take too long anyway.
Well, RPG boss fights usually do, but you always feel usually, often, let's say, do. But you always feel like, well, they probably just feel like they need to confer this feeling of this is a boss, this is a big deal, this isn't like the other. But when the regular battles take that long, it's all out of whack. It's not proportional at all. But
and it's just because their combat system had lots of things where the enemy could do to effectively make it hard to hurt them or impossible to hurt them. And so they would effectively just turn it into trench warfare for turn after turn after turn. And it's just like, fuck. And if I had the right unit for whatever bullshit they were trotting out that day in the party, then okay, I can break whatever dumb thing they've done. But if I don't know they're gonna do it, well, then I don't have the right unit in the party, and so I spend a bunch of time dealing with them. But see, like that game was never in the running for a 10. So the game,
I know you loved it, but yeah,
I did. Rhythm Heaven
There's plenty of games I love that I wouldn't have given a 10 to. I mean, that's the thing. I remember, and there's quite a lot of what PPKO says here. I don't feel very differently myself. I assume this is obviously he alludes to it already. This is how we got here. The whole significant Mario powered tennis rabbit hole.
Sure.
I was expressing myself then, I thought it was stupid how there was, how kind of like this outrage at the notion that something as trifling as a portable tennis game, anyone would have the temerity to give it a 10. I just thought that was silly, and way too precious about giving 10s. And also it's like, well, all right, well, maybe you would never give a game, a 10. Of that sort, perhaps, although that is by definition a sort of prejudice, which is not the best thing to carry into a review. But also, they don't have to impose that kind of value system onto somebody else. Let them review it the way they see fit. If you disagree, so be it. But I'd hate for everybody that's reviewing to just sort of kind of check themselves and try and conform to some abstract notion of what's the proper way of doing things or all that, and not really just give you their sort of still a kind of reasoned and a kind of analytical take on the game, not just like, oh yeah, this game's awesome kind of thing, or it sucks, conversely. Right. But still, it's their opinion. It's not varnished by things, like expectations of what everybody else thinks about the way you should review things. But I will say, having all that, about like I don't like look at somebody else giving a 10 and saying, oh, they're just getting carried away, they're full of shit or something. When it came to doing the rankings thing with Seren, I couldn't pull the trigger on a 10 very often. Right. I didn't go in with the attitude of like, oh, no. I'm only going to give 2 10s through the whole thing. That's it. You know, I can't possibly give any more than that, and that's it. But as you just went through each one organically and just kind of, you know, instinctively, what does this feel like to me? There were very few games that I was able to do it with. So, and that's just honestly how I felt about them. It wasn't a preconceived notion of, you know, oh, well, a game's got to be near or actually flawless to give the top score or anything like that. It's just a feeling. And again, I mean, goodness knows how many times we've said this, but really should not focus that much on the score, for goodness sake. When you're reviewing games, there's more important things. It's the body
last
of the
thing
text.
I do.
Yeah, but insofar as you are doing the score, you know, it really is just a like, okay, I'm putting a number on it, and it's a feeling and all that, and there's not much more. You know, if you want the real stuff, read the damn thing.
I mean, I skip to the score first thing in a game review.
Which is right at the top, which is impressive. So you skip to the top.
Well, not always. Not always. I mean, there's plenty of reviews where they leave it at the bottom still.
There's only one outlet, John.
Presumably to try and ensnare such people.
Well, because and the reason why I do that is I'm like, okay, so this person is saying this game is really good or middling or whatever. So I get that as sort of a high, like kind of an early take on what this person is saying, is what their general opinion of this game is, and then I read the review to see if what they're saying actually backs that up.
And when you're editing reviews, that's part of the task.
And more to the point, how
so I do approach it like that, still.
Isn't it? You know, what I mean? That's the biggest thing. Is it's just because if you're thinking about it from a purchase decision point of view, you know, if you could read a review that's absolutely glowing, but if it's praising the elements of the game, prospectively that don't necessarily appeal to you the most about, you know, a game in that genre or series or whatever, you could still take a glowing review and say, but it's probably not for me. You know, like that. If it's written well and it, you know, is putting it all in the proper context and reasoning, it could achieve that.
If it lists the pros of, you can touch the faces of all of the cast, like, oh, well, okay, that's not for me. Thank you. I do want to speak in defense of my apparent sin against the site that I've never played a game that I feel like I'd give a 10. My metric for that really, and it's not like, oh, this game has to be flawless. That game, it's
what did I tell you when we had the discussion about Ghost Trick?
You read it and you read the review and you're like, you've got some things here that you're calling out, and like basically you told me to give it a thought. And the reality of the situation is, my metric has always been like, it doesn't have to be a perfect game for me to give it a 10. It's something I've considered. It's a question of, are there components of the game that diminished my enjoyment in a material way?
Exactly. I think for me, context is always important. There's always a context for a game, for a particular genre. Could this game, to me, it's in order for something to be a 10, I have to look at it and say, there's no reasonable way that they could have made this game better in any area for what it is.
Right. And that doesn't preclude flaws, like, cause that's the reasonable part. So for me, Breath of the Wild is a game that if I had been reviewing it, which I didn't, would have gotten consideration, but ultimately I like weapon degradation. I like, a bunch of stuff in that game. I actually feel like the biggest knock against that game isn't the dungeons, although they're not very good. To me, what hampered the game for me and what took me out of that moment and what decreased my enjoyment and would probably knock it down to, dare I say, the absolute fall of a 9.75, is that I felt like the way they implemented the Blood Moon system fundamentally would take me out of the game. The idea that Link can choose not to fight, but if he does, he's doesn't really solve his problem. Like, because those enemies are just going to come back later.
Especially, I don't know whether it got patched or something, but, you know, like, there were definitely times where it felt like they were kind of speeding up in frequency when you played it around launch, where it's like, okay, you settle in for how long it takes for it needs to, like, reset the world because it can't keep track of everything, I guess, you know, the underpinning of the Blood Moon sort of concept, but that seemed to accelerate, and then it's like, well, now this is, really, and I don't know whether they did, like, fix that or, you know, or something, but it kind of, if it could have, like, felt, and this is the thing, obviously, what things feel or seem like is not always consistent with, like, what's actually happening, but if it continued to feel like it was a consistent interval, I don't think I would have thought of it as significantly diminishing the experience, but when it got to that point where it was like, "Christ, this is just happening all the time now," like, it did take you out of it. I agree with that.
I definitely had a situation once where it happened back to back, like within 20 minutes of play, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? But the issue wasn't just that it was happening. It was that the way the game responds to your and Breath of the Wild is interesting in that it doesn't have a linear power gain. Most games that have power gain, your power gain is linear, or it's at least constantly forward. It doesn't go down. It's a constant gain. It's not a delta. So there's not a downstream. Like, you don't become less powerful. Breath of the Wild can, in theory, make you less powerful due to weapons degradation. And I think that's why the weapons degradation system is so vital to that game. It creates nuance in the gameplay by making you less powerful at certain moments. And that may not be like a pure stat point thing. That may just be you suck with spears and that's all you got left, brother. Figure it out. But to me, it was the Blood Moons combined with the fact that their response to the power gain was to just put out different colors of enemies. And they just became damage sponges. They weren't particularly more difficult because they did the same thing. And I had mastered fighting most of the enemies. It just meant it took longer. So I would have been better off if, as opposed to like, hey, I wiped out this patrol of bokoblins, and then the Blood Moon rolls around, and now they're black bokoblins, but they're doing the same thing. They're sitting at the same camp, cooking the same leg of meat that I'm going to steal and eat every time because fuck y'all. I'm dance on your grave. It would be more logical in the context of like they're operating as an occupying force if the response is there's just more of them around. They're more aware. They're watching for you. You can't sneak up on them the same way. They're doing patrols. That would have been much more engaging and much more in tune with what this game was, which was really ultimately a game about exploration and about constantly being surprised. And that meant the combat encounters weren't surprising, and they're fairly prolific out in the field, especially if you played the game like I did, where you're constantly traveling. So, no, I can say that game is transformative, and that it's going to have impact for 20 plus years, and that it's amazing, and I've never played a game like it, and still say, but there are things that took me far enough out of the experience for a significant amount of time that I would not give them a 10. It's not just a statement of are there imperfections, because if that was fixed, it might be a 10, even with the bad dungeons that I will say again.
Yeah, there'd be other imperfections, but you know, which ones, dare I say it, rise to the level of significance, where it kind of influences the score one way or the other. Again, obviously, that a lot of that in the end is you can kind of you can think about it in an analytical way and really try and like weigh these things up, but in the end, it's going to be like whether something actually, like you said, it's a game design thing that you've identified, very sort of clearly. But whether it's in like you said, whether like, oh well, the bad dungeons or the lacking dungeons, let's say, is not would be like still within the parameters of 10, but the Blood Moon stuff kind of takes it out of the 10 territory. That's ultimately just a kind of subjective assessment. Is what you feel is really essential to the experience of what makes the game great, and therefore what does or does not significantly diminish it.
And what, in that case for Blood Moon, what specifically attacks the things about the game I think are excellent.
Yeah.
Like, it undermines the pillars that that support the excellence of that game. What I would say on as a corollary to that is he talks about he would expect the average to be 5.5, but see there's a huge mistake there, which is treating the review scores as a quantitative measurement. They're not. They're numbers, but ultimately they're still qualitative. They're just it's like letter grades on a report card. That's a qualitative metric, even if it's backed by numbers, because ultimately it's just an assessment. It's not like I can't go take out a tool. They don't have a tool out there for me to measure a game's review score. There's not physics behind that number. Therefore, it is really just a matter of, I look at it and I make an assessment. I put a number on it because that's the language, the lingua franca of reviews.
Because if you don't, John won't read it.
Right, exactly. He'll scroll to the bottom to find the score, won't see it, and he'll get mad.
Yeah, I'd just
be like, oh man, TLDR.
I just feel like I understand your argument, James, but also like it really depends on the scale that you decide to use, right? And it seems like a lot of video game outlets just decided on the 1 to 10 scale, or God forbid, the 1 to 100 scale.
I would love for NWR to do 1 to 1,000.
There are scales used by movie reviewers and stuff like that, like 1 to 4 stars or 5 stars.
Sure.
That I think like they usually do a better job of using the full scale, or like there's more representation across the scale.
They probably only have to invest an hour and a half into, and they could do it from their home, into reviewing a movie. Movie reviews tend to be fairly short too. With the exception of like the odd long form piece about a movie that's particularly unique or influential.
So you're saying that the more words a review contains, the more granular the score has to be?
No, I'm saying the more words your review contains, or the more time you have to spend to consume the content in order to evaluate it, the less likely you are to consume the content at the bottom of the scale. Movie reviewers can review bad movies. Oh, again, I reiterate, they don't review the bottom of the barrel.
It's still kind of curated, again.
But they can review more of the bottom of the scale because it doesn't take them that long to do. They can knock out 3 or 4 reviews in a day.
But the thing is, like, if you just, let's say, like, I don't know, like I've seen actually like the Waypoint Radio, which I listened to, they talked about something similar recently, and one of their points, and I think I agree with that, is that if you don't use the 1 to 5 part of your scale, then effectively your scale is 6 to 10, and so shouldn't your scale just be 1 to 5?
I don't,
if the games that exist below that 5 might as well not exist to your audience and to you, who's trying to cater to your audience, then why would you even have the 1 to 5?
Then what if you play them? Then what if
But you've already determined that.
But sometimes publishers put out a 2, Guillaume. It happens.
It does happen. It sometimes.
Then you give it a 5, which people were, or a 1. Like, which people were already kind of not paying attention to. Like, use the bottom of your scale.
But see, that then, if you say that, you need to try to use all the scales in some kind of frequency, like, no! There really shouldn't be that many 2s. NWR's metric is a 1 is I can play your game. Your game could literally, when I launch it up, it be an image that says and that's a 1. Because the game boots. Now, we probably wouldn't review that because that's pretty fucked up. But that's the metric. Anything that boots and plays gets you there. Okay. So then, let's talk about the game. Let's get it up there. So why does Oh Sir get a 2? Why didn't I give it a 1? I don't know. I went back and read my review just now, and I'm like, I could have seen that cracking towards the 1s. But, I think my explanation for giving it a 2 in that moment in time was that it was like, okay, functionally, it does do the thing it's supposed to do. I can get through it. I can put together these stupid sentences, but they're horrible and offensive and they're bad. So the game gets a fucking 2 because it's not funny, and that's the only thing it sets out to do. I could make an argument that game should have been a 1. And maybe it should have been, but I played it 6 years ago and I don't remember why I gave it a 2. But the review indicates it was kind of in that middle ground space. But that game is a massive exception and should get a score that reflects the fact that it is a massive exception. Like, that game is so fundamentally awful. So fucking terrible. It's got a joke about Harvey Weinstein's casting couch in it. well after we knew what he was doing. Like, that game is so exceptionally poor, it should have a space in the review space reserved for its specific brand of horrificness. And so then you step backwards and you start fleshing it out, and there just aren't going to be that many 2s, because for a game to be that fucking atrocious, and for me to invest the time in reviewing the game that fucking atrocious, then it's got you have to work to make a game that bad. It's really difficult because there are basic underpinnings, just like in film, of like, if I put together a competent hero's journey, my movie can still be not particularly well written, but the audience will get enough of a feel out of it that they might be like, it was okay, I guess. Like, there are certain beats and metrics that are well laid paths that should get you to at least, like, this is a functionally marginal product that you have created. Because if you can't get there, then you probably shouldn't have created the product to begin with. So the idea that, like, your review scores should look like the bell curve, that's stupid and wrong. Like, it's just not the way like, half the games can't just be like, they're all 5s. All these games are 5. Every game here is a 5.
Most games, 5 indicates average, so therefore most games are probably average.
But it doesn't. They're not. That's the mistake here. It's the review score's not quantitative. It's a qualitative metric, and you can't average qualitative metrics.
It's a qualitative metric in quantitative terms.
Right, but you can't average a qualitative metric. You can't say, like, I can't average how red something is. I can average out the hex values that reflect its redness.
This is the problem with the whole Metacritic era, is that, it kind of leads people down this road of like, we can, kind of, all this stuff is fungible, like we can mix all these different scores together, someone who gave it 4 stars, well, that's an 80. That's the same as an 8.0 from a site that uses it. And it probably isn't. It's the reality of it, and it certainly might not be anything like what the actual substance of the sentiment in the text is expressed in it.
And by not tying it to that kind of like, well, I need to use the whole score, and it needs to look like some kind of even distribution. It gives you the ability to encounter a game that's fundamentally fucked in some really deep ways, and then yet I have this inexplicable, like, emotion attached to. Fragile Dreams is a great example. I gave it a 7.5. And I don't know that cold. I looked it up. My review is just bullet point after bullet point of, why did you do this? Why did you do this? This is bad. Stop doing that. This is obnoxious. Why did they do that? And then I get back to the core message, which is like, but, for whatever reason, and I actually give the reasons, I speak about it, like, this thing is having an impact on me in a way that it's more than the sum of its score points. Whereas Hawks 2, which is the opposite example, I actually take points off because I feel worse about the full product than the individualized components. It's not a weight and measure thing. It's just like, I'm going to summarize my gut feel with another gut feel that we've chosen to use numbers. If we wanted to assign words to the full spectrum to turn this into like a diction battle, I could say that my feelings on Fragile Dreams are wistful confusion. And like, okay, there we go. That's my score. Average that in Metacritic, you fucks. Try it. Try to figure out what that is.
No, I think for my money, I wouldn't object to an outlet having a sort of a score system where it was very reduced form of just like, well, basically, yeah, it's kind of the 5 stars or something, and we just if and when it turns out that you get these games where, it's somehow far worse than the usual thing is. And you might say, well, the problem is, you haven't got the way to convey how much lower it is the way you have in a 10 scale, where you get, I reviewed something, I gave a 3 that, I wouldn't be that comfortable with the idea of like, oh, well, this is no stars compared to, a 6 out of 10 is a 1 star. Like if it was transposed like that. But I wouldn't object to an outlet doing it that way if it just felt like, what this is, we all our writers on staff, they know the scale, how we want to use it. they know the fact that generally speaking, the games that we actually cover, this makes sense for, and we communicate that to the audience. And most importantly, it's just, we write the review with all these things in mind, placed in the proper context, and you read it and it makes sense. I wouldn't object. Like I said, it would have limitations because, like I said, you wouldn't necessarily be able to sort of put some of those outliers in quite the same sort of stark contrast that maybe they might deserve. But, if they want to go that way, that's fine with it. I generally speaking, I'm like, if people want to use more tens, if people want to, use more kind of, almost like a shifted scale where we don't consider, the kind of the half of the scale where, these games exist, but we don't tend to cover them very often. I'm all for that as long as it's properly communicated and put in context, because that's how you want to express it. Then I don't see why they should be told they can't.
No, I don't. I'm fine with an outlet did that, but to go back to your previous point, like that would, if it's just part of a Metacritic average to get to 7. Like that's going to render that metric completely meaningless because you've effectively introduced somebody who has decided to review games in a completely different way. And I don't fucking care what happens to Metacritic, but that's the jumping off point for this email.
Yeah,
and
it is. It is exactly. Obviously, it can be useful. You know what I mean? Like for a lot, I want to let's have a smattering of reviews. It's like, let's pick one that's a positive review. Let's pick one of the more negative ones. Let's pick one of the more middling ones. You could easily, to get a sort of more, kind of general picture of a game you might be considering. Let's see what the people that don't like it kind of have to say why they don't and all that kind of thing. The easiest way of sort of doing that is, pulling up that list of, with all the scores going in descending order and picking from them there, so like the ones that don't, because there are outlets that don't use scores and they just use very, kind of, limited categories, like, was it Eurogamer just has like recommended and essential. That's
right.
it.
And NWR has, for the review mini, has the recommended, not recommended.
Yeah, so it's
basically our virtual console rating scheme, pretty much.
Yeah. It's either like nothing. It doesn't. It's not. It's a review and there's no recommendation. There's a recommendation and then there's like no. You have to play this. Essential. That's it. That's all I do. So there is an element of rating, but it's not again something that plays nice with Metacritic. It doesn't kind of average out or anything like that really. But that's what they've been using for quite some time now. They didn't. It wasn't always that way. They did have scores at some point. I forget when exactly they made that change. And it probably hurts traffic, but at least
it definitely does.
Like in a very direct way. But they made that switch and they've kind of stuck with it, and I think it works for them. So I'm generally in favour of more diversity in approaches to this stuff. If it's what you feel is gonna kind of help channel like your writer's genuine kind of feelings on it most clearly to the reader. That's the biggest thing.
John, I'm going to give you a way of starting a review, and you can tell me if you think it rises to the level of this game is significant.
Okay.
This is what I put in Crazy Hunter, a game I gave a 1.5. There is absolutely zero reason for anyone who has ever or will ever live to play Crazy Hunter.
Mm.
Is that rise to this is significant?
It doesn't have. It's very wordy.
It's very wordy.
It's not as much of a catchphrase.
But it's future-proofed. I did future-proof it for future generations.
It is. It reads more, but it reads more of a back-of-the-box warning than it does a
future
catchphrase.
Generations, don't bother to reevaluate this.
I was thinking, if you want a catchphrase, it would be more something like, "This game is an abortion."
Jeez.
Future generations, ellipsis,
that gets
play
headlines.
This game.
There we go. But not
Box
present
quote.
generations. No, stay away. You're not ready for Crazy Hunter. This is a situation where maybe I should have given this game a 1. The reason I didn't I didn't is literally, and I call it out, is that the water effect looked really good for a DS game.
Yeah.
It got 0.5 for having
That's worthwhile.
really impressive water that I allege they must have stolen from a different game.
It's like, yes, probably stole that assets from a different game.
From a better game. It's like, yeah, this is a catastrophe of a product. But,
Yeah.
I mean, it's I think it's really hard. Like, I think about what games that I've given a 1 or a 2 to, which I've given a lot, even a 3. Like, they've really crossed into some kind of holy ground of just, we have created a product that somehow defies any, like, me actively trying to get some enjoyment. Like, not just I'm casually playing it to review. When I get a game that's really terrible like that, I get to the point where I'm actively seeking out things that bring me joy in it. Like, we're really getting to the point where it's like, I'm going to try to find fun in this fucking game, no matter what it takes. And I can't. And so it ends up in this, like, absolute Vanta Black review score where it's like, I can't even perceive the contours of fun when I look at it from any angle. And so, to me, it feels like you need a space in your review scores that highlight those, if only because sometimes people like to go research how games get there, how a game manages to achieve that unholy level of just absolute ineptitude, and having something that calls them out and highlights them for the historical footnote, be it a completely, statistically an anomalous review score, or some other metric where it's like, if we had a recommended for fans, not recommended, if we created like a 4th tier that's like recommended for sociopaths, then, like, yeah, maybe we could have something there for that. But I think having something that calls those out, that says, hey, this thing is unique, is special, is worth it. It's worth it to have the ground for those things to stand on, to say, like, we have created something vile. We have created something unholy. We have created anti-art. We have created something that generates a void of art. The artistry of other games is diminished by proximity. And having
maybe the absence of fun is actually a sign that it is art. It's challenging your conception of what a video game can be.
I always think back to university in the sculpture gallery they had in the student commons, where somebody got a clawfoot bathtub out of a house that was being demolished, and those googly eyeballs that always look up, the round ones, filled it with those and made some comment about how we see ourselves when we bathe. And it got central display, and I'm like, this is something that he had like a day to finish. No, he BS'd his way into this. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. And that might be engineer brain talking, or it could just be artists are full of shit. Who can say? But that was definitely full of shit. If you told me Crazy Hunter was
I thought
like...
it was full of googly eyes.
I was going to say.
Well, it's full of conductive shit. Like, it's the manifestation of shit as googly eyes. If you were to say that Crazy Hunter was like an art piece that they somehow managed to slip into the Nintendo DSiWare shop, I'd believe you. Because that makes more sense than somebody going, I've made a good game that I will now sell. Because remember, you had to sell a certain number to ever get any payouts in the DSiWare shop.
That was their kind of quality control, the one sort of mechanism, wasn't it? It's like, well,
and there's no way Crazy Hunter did that.
Release it at your own peril, because if you don't get over a threshold, you're not getting anything. And
nobody made any
sadly,
money on this game.
That was probably correlated with quality more weakly than they imagined, and therefore, it's probably the games that were, perfectly kind of creditable. That didn't reach that threshold, while complete shit did. Like, that's just like, it was a blunt instrument, I guess.
You would see like this random game from a publisher in Bulgaria, and it'd be the worst thing you've ever seen, and you're like, there's no way. There's absolutely zero way this thing crossed the threshold. But it exists, and I must document it for history, because now you can't get Crazy Hunter anymore.
Yeah, the worst, the lowest score I ever gave was a 4.
Wow.
For Dirt 2.
It's amazing when you select who gets what games
exactly.
to review.
I avoided the worst.
Selection bias takes many forms, sometimes very personal forms.
But yeah, it's like my tagline was, "You'll want to leave this racer in the dust." Yes!
There you go.
I just killed it.
Perfect.
But I said, Dirt 2 gives Wii owners the short end of the stick, providing an utterly vanilla experience with shoddy controls and little in the way of extras or polish. It's an afterthought and a cash-in instead of a well-crafted racing title.
I like when I read a review I wrote and I give it like a score that's not middling, it's low, like a 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember the game. And then I read the review and I still don't remember the game. And I look at screenshots and I still do. I wrote a 14-paragraph review of a game called Monkey Madness Island Escape, allegedly. I don't believe that because I don't remember this game. But apparently I did. And I justify the 4 quite fine. But that's the other part, though. Is it's like as you review more and more games, I think what tends to happen is you're... I just Googled Monkey Madness Island Escape, and then I saw a video called In Defense of Monkey Island, and I'm like, Escape from Monkey Island, and I'm like, what? And then I read it again, and I'm like, it's Escape from Monkey Island. Okay, nobody made a video about this fucking game. Okay, we're fine. I'm just going through Dirt 2 and reminiscing here. I've heard better sound in DS games. God. Yeah. I mean, Zach is going to own the all-timer forever because of Homie's Rollers. Like, there's no getting near that, but it needs a review score of its own. It needs like Homie Rollers out of 10 for its historical precedence. Like it needs its own score. It's not sufficient that it's got a 1.
I gave this Homie Rollers out of 10.
Yeah, like I said, great. The score is ultimately a qualitative metric. So if NWR just decided, as our own prerogative that there's a special score, it's called Homie Rollers out of 10, and it does not reach the zeros, which is a game that just doesn't function. But it breaks through the bottom of the score and has somehow managed to wrap its way back around. I'm fine with that. I'm fine where we get to a place where somebody says like we've created the anti-review. And that's another thing though that movies and TVs can have. You can hate watch a TV show and enjoy it. You can hate watch a movie and enjoy it. I don't know that you can hate play a video game and enjoy it because it's too active.
It's too frustrating.
Yeah, like you just get a lot of times a really hellaciously bad game is extremely frustrating to experience. There's I talked about it back when we were doing the Patreon. There's this anime from the 60s called Chargeman Ken. And it's so bad, it's alleged that it killed the studio that made it. I've played it, or I've watched it. I've watched the whole show. It's completely unfollowable. It doesn't make any sense. None of the characters do anything of value at any point. Our hero is a boy who has a laser gun that evaporates beings from existence. Normally, he's using it to kill aliens who are invading Earth, but a lot of times the aliens are dressed as people, in people skin, and he doesn't know they're aliens. He just assumes and starts blasting. Would it kill a person? Oh, yeah. Did we give this power to an 8-year-old? Sure did. Does he use it responsibly? Never. And so, like, it's just an entire show of that. The show was aired out of order, so if you watch it in the release order, it doesn't make any sense, which is impressive. There are like story events where they tried to have a plot, but they happen in the wrong order. So you just go like, what the fuck is happening? It's 8 minutes of madness every time. There's an episode about giving kids psychedelic mushrooms so they don't do their homework, and somehow the aliens will use that to take over the world. It's the worst thing I've ever seen. There's a hair on the camera a lot. It's a cell animation. So I took pictures of cells. Frequently, there are hairs on the cell, and you can see them, and they're very distracting. This could happen. A hair falls into the camera. Most animation would catch this and reshoot. They didn't, because fuck it.
Sorry, I'm just reading the Homie Rollers review.
It's amazing.
The tagline, "Oh, when will death come?"
But like I watched that show front to back and had a great time. A game that fails that fundamentally, you will not have a great time. You'll be playing Homie's Rollers and you'll be miserable.
Man, I forgot how many terrible games Zach
It's amazing.
It's incredible. He kind of goes on. He's like, one of my friends asked me the other day why I review awful, horrible, cramp-inducing shovelware without pay. My knee-jerk answer was free games in the mail, but there's a larger, nobler motivation at work here. In playing such dreck as Animates, B-Movie Game, Rockstar Presents Table Tennis, and most recently Spitfire Heroes, there comes a responsibility to relay to the public just how terrible these games are.
Homies Rollers isn't even Zach's lowest score. That's the part that's amazing.
If just one kid reads my review and avoids playing Nitro Bike, it'll all be worth it. I also get lots of free store credit.
Zach had a lot of personal time that he could use to review games, so he would just be like, yeah, give me whatever. And
I mean, like,
that became a challenge.
Here's the worst of the worst, right? So the games that have got a 1 are Bakugan, Champions of Vestroia for the Switch.
Which is recent, and Reggie was shilling it.
Tested with robots for Wii U.
That's a Don review.
Yep. Flap and Zagata, that's another Don.
That's another Don review. Yep.
Yeah, on Wii U. The Smurfs 2 on DS by Josh Max, that's a 1.
Yep.
Family Party 30 Great Games Obstacle Arcade on Wii U by Zach Kaplan. That's another 1. Cake Ninja 2. That's by you.
By me.
That's you. You gave that a 1. Chronicles of Vampires: The Awakening on DS. That was Zach. I got a 1. Charlie's Angels for GameCube by Jeff Shirley.
Jeff Shirley.
That's a famous one, isn't it?
Yep.
That's the one. The only pro in that game is if you shoot a bullet through the center hole of a GameCube disc, you're a really good shot. That was his pro.
Yeah. Red Colony got a 1.5 on Switch by Zach Miller.
Yep.
Energy Invasion on Switch got a 1.5 from Don. He's put in some work.
Don put in the work.
He's put in some work. Suspension Railroad Simulator. I remember that one on Wii U from Don. That's 1.5. Yep. Candy Match 3
Curtis.
on 3DS. Don Koopman. 1.5.
Is that Don? Okay.
Yep. Crash and the Boys Street
Challenge. Yeah, Crash and the Boys. There's Curtis.
Curtis Bonds. I got a 1.5. Chevrolet Camaro Wild Ride 3D.
I remember that one. Yeah.
3DS from Don. 1.5. Man, if there's a guy that knows what a 1.5 is, it's Don Koopman. Mina no Ashaberry Chat on 3DS by Don. 1.5.
That one doesn't work. That's pretty amazing. I mean, It works, but also doesn't.
Yeah. Zombiescape, Crazy Hunter from James. The Hidden.
The Crazy Hunter, yeah, that's
Homie Rollers, and My Horse and Me. Those roll out the 1.5s.
Yeah,
rounds them out.
We've reviewed thousands of games on this site. And that's it. That's the whole list of 1s and 1.5s because and I was able to name the reviewer for a lot of them because I remember those games. I remember those reviews coming through. I remember somebody posting an email and they would request somebody edit it and we would send an email to our editing alias and normally the text is like, hey, I've got a review up. It might include embargo date is Wednesday or something like that. And sometimes you would see one where the text is just guttural sound. It'd just be like, ugh. And you're like,
yeah.
Oh, I need to open that one. Yeah, I need to open up the Word doc and ghosts would fly out of the screen.
Yeah. We've given out 8 1s and 12 1.5s in the entire history of the site.
Yeah, which is way less than we've given out 10s. Mm-hmm. Because I think a 1 is actually harder than a 10. I think the fact I've seen a 1 is kind of amazing.
Well, yeah, because you're looking for something. Right.
You want to give it to not give it a 1. Every fiber of your being is this can't be the bottom of the barrel because this is the bottom. I am saying this is the worst possible game this could be and still boot.
Yeah.
So at that point, it's almost the inverse. I'm looking, so I said, the thing to take away 10 is something that takes me out of the fun I'm having with the game. It's substantial hindrance to the fun. I'm looking for a substantial alleviation of suffering. I'm looking for anything that makes me feel whole again for even a microsecond.
Yeah. I mean, this site is coming up on, basically 24 years. I think this is the 24th year that this site has been up. And we've given out 8 1s in 24 years.
Yeah. You want something to make you feel anything positive. Like I said, Crazy Hunter got a 0.5 because I thought the water looked so good they must have stolen it. That's all you have to do to get a 0.5. Be good at one graphical effect.
Be good at ripping off another.
Make me the nice water guy from the Nintendo's failed social media project for a second. Congratulations, you're not a 1. So Cake Ninja 2 couldn't even pull that off. Mm-hmm. Cake Ninja 2 is a game. It's Fruit Ninja with cakes, if you can't figure that out. I don't know there's a Cake Ninja 1. I'm not sure, but the most pressing thing is I didn't realize they were supposed to be cakes, even though the game is called Cake Ninja. It looks that bad, and it's the only thing on screen. Like, there's nothing. It's the absolute barrenness. It's Mercury is closest to the sun, but Venus is so much hotter because of its atmosphere. It's the surface of fucking Venus, that game. You are looking for anything, any sign of life, but it has been blasted away by just the absolute abject heat and pressure of what is the worst place in the world. That's a 1. It is magnificent in its failure. It is an icon. I have read every single 1 review on this site at least 5 times because there's something magical about them. And that's why having them reserved with their own magic number is important. Because you can go read their, I can basically tell you how Flappin' Zagata starts. I believe he just says, I found it the worst Flappy Bird clone there is. Which is a high bar, because Flappy Bird sucks! Flappy Bird is a deliberately bad game that was given away for free to put ads in it. And was so bad and caused so much trouble, the guy who made it basically went into hiding. This is worse than that, and it costs money. So yeah, we need a score like a 1. At least how NWR reviews games, as like the contamination zone for Flappin' Zagata. A game so bad that Don Koopman opined about it years later. Don Koopman plays nothing but garbage, and he's like, oh, Flappin' Zagata. Jesus fucking Christ, Flappin' Zagata. Like, these homie rollers, stuff like that, these games become punchlines for us. They have become like the currency that we talk about when we talk about game reviews, because they are so exceptional. Their exceptionality might not be exceptional in the good way, but exceptional just means unique. And they are truly unique. They achieve things that no other product dares achieve. Like being a bad Flappy Birds clone that cost money. And Don, God bless him, did a video. And like, if you watch the video, it looks like something you would have gotten on a CD that was on the side of a box of Kicks that you put in your Windows or Mac compatible computer in 1996. And he fucking, it's a game that costs $5 on Wii U. So yeah, like his review is blistering. But if you read it, it's mostly just befuddlement. He's mostly just confused. And yeah, it's sublime. Like, I like that we have a score that can house this like museum of oddities that are these games that are all different in the way they achieve their badness. Like, that's the beautiful thing about a 1. There's so many ways to achieve a 1. There's so many beautiful, fundamentally gorgeous ways to achieve a 1. Achieving a 10 really requires you just basically check off all the checkboxes in what you've in delivering the vision you've laid out for yourself. And that's why I think it's easier to get a 10 if your game is relatively straightforward and simple. Like, you can achieve the best achievable version of that idea, that concept, if that concept is really simple. If you're trying to do that on a game with the complexities of a Breath of the Wild, a game with that much production value, like, production value buys you review points. It just does. Like, if your game looks really good and performs well and has good sound and good music and nice voice acting, like, yeah, there probably is a floor for your review score.
Yeah, that's like most games that get an 8 on the internet.
Like, yeah, you've achieved, like, you achieved artistry and technical merit. You may not stand out, but, like, you've achieved a baseline that, yeah, you're going to get a decent review score because you put in the effort. It's the same with movies. Like, there are precious few movies where the budget is completely asinine insane and they're just bad. And that's why when it happens, they're memorable. All those Michael Bay Transformers movies, yeah, they're obscenely expensive and they're god-awful.
Yeah.
And, like, Like
They're
that's
bad.
why they're held up as this like paragon of the bad movie, because they are so expensive and there's so much production value. You're like, well, they've got to at least be like have a redeeming quality, and they don't. Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, you can throw enough money at something that it has enough production value that can pretty much distract from the mediocrity of it.
Right. So if you're still bad with that much production value, you've done something special.
Yeah, like I recently I had never seen Avatar, and I watched Avatar, and I'm like, this is a very mediocre movie, but it's pretty to look at. So
in a 3D IMAX theater, which is how I saw that movie way back when, I was like, the story sucks. But
Yep.
I didn't have that thought until after I left the theater. In the theater, I was just sort of taking in visuals.
yeah, exactly. That game is that movie is so visually impressive that you're just like, yeah, story sucked, but looked really good.
It's Brave New World's feelies, ultimately. Like, yeah, I'm dropping literature on here. I don't know. Is Huxley literature? I guess. It's a little bit trite, but you know, you can walk out of the Avatar, which is now made like $2 billion in the sequel that no one asked for, but here it is. It's like, so what do I know? And be like, oh, I guess I saw that and it was really pretty and nice, but whatever. I mean, this is why all those Zack Snyder movies got made fun of. They were obscenely expensive. They had a ton of production value, and you couldn't watch them because they were too fucking dark. It's like, what an achievement. You're an artist. We spent like an hour on this email, and I'm passionate about it because I got called out, but I actually like the way that I score things. I think you know, I give a lot of 6s, I give a lot of 7s. But that's also bias. You know, I didn't get a lot of the top tier games, and now I don't review much at all. So if I do, I'm really just going like, hey, you guys, I know we have a big backlog. Let me help you out. Give me something.
Would you give Ogre Battle 64? Would you give that a 10 out of 10?
Oh fuck no! That game is broken as shit. I would give that game an 8. It doesn't mean I don't love it. I adore that game.
Yeah.
But that game is absolutely like busted in a million different ways. I can shatter that game now that I know the ways in under, you know, the speed run for that game has got to be like 6 hours because there's so many ways you can just dismember it.
Yep.
And its story is goofy and weird, and there's all kinds of like bad localization that sometimes leads to like weird, I don't know if it's implicit, like intentional, undertones of conversations where it's like, are they supposed to be a couple? Is that what this is? And it's like, no, I don't think so. I think the writers just used the wrong word there and made it come off more romantic than they intend, because this scene's not really meant to be romantic, I don't think. Because they're talking about how I'm gonna eat the soul of a demon and turn into a demon. And it's like,
No need to go down that rabbit hole, but I was curious to get your hot take on that, whether you would give it a 10 out of 10 or...
No, not even close.
Yep.
So yeah, but that doesn't mean I can't love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a 7. There's a game that's a 7 that I adore, but it's a 7. I think it just is what it is. All right, we went really long on one email, and I hate that. Because we have other emails I wanted to do. So, gentlemen, what should we do?
I didn't really get to say much about the topic, and it was mostly like the one rant. Well, I don't know how to follow that up.
But is there something you want to dig into?
Well, I find it interesting to compare some of the compare like movie reviewing with video game reviewing, and I know that there are differences just because of the size of games and also the time that it takes to make games now. Like, it probably dwarfs the time it takes to make a decent movie. But it's so there's this kind of this I don't know what to call it. I don't know exactly what they are, if they're like some sort of foundation or some sort of company, but there's like this Quebec institution, I suppose, that their mission, wait, I've got several pages open right now. Its mission is to promote cinema knowledge and I'm translating on the fly here, and to foster the development of critical sense in moviegoers. So that's its stated mission. And so like they basically have like this rating from 1 to 7. 1 is like masterpiece. 2 is remarkable.
Oh God, they start at the bottom of this. Oh jeez.
Right. But anyway, so 2 remarkable, 3 very good, 4 good, 5 average, 6 poor, and 7 is like crummy, I guess it translates as, or lousy. So a lot of movies, like you can see an average of 5 movie, like usually that's going to be perfectly watchable. Apparently, Quantum Mania got a 5 recently. I'm sure it's like a good time in theaters. But the more you get up into scale, the better it is, I guess. Like 2 is remarkable. But it's interesting because the something that I've seen recently, so there was this like Quebec movie that got a 2 recently, and I guess like during the discussion around that, they were saying like, well, why didn't get a 1? Well, they don't consider movies for a 1 rating unless they're at least 20 years old. So you can't get like the masterpiece rating until you get reevaluated like 20 years later. And you kind of have to have achieved the remarkable rating, the 2 rating, in the first place. Like it can't just be like any old movie, it gets revisited. Like it has to be remarkable. It has to be like at the moment, kind of be like have an impact with the critics, I suppose.
But what if the critics were wrong? Like that does happen. Like
that,
the critics.
That's one of the things that I find interesting here, because like I look at their criteria for a masterpiece, and of course, masterpiece like is used correctly here. Basically, you can't have like one. I guess like one movie maker can't really have several masterpieces. Also, like you can't have a masterpiece and only have made one movie.
What?
Well, it seems like, yeah, like that's so there are different, I guess, like philosophies behind, I guess, like movie criticism, or like
that's
appraising
more
a
akin
movie.
to putting someone in the Hall of Fame of a sports league.
Yeah.
In terms
Right.
of we gotta have the cooling off period after they've retired and consider them, in a historical context once that's surpassed.
I struggle with the idea though that you can
Well, I'm having a little bit of trouble here parsing if like these like criteria are have all to be true, or if like it can be one or the other.
Okay, because like
it can be a pioneering movie in the history of cinema. So like they gave a Citizen Kane as an example, also Birth of a Nation. It has to be a I don't know how to translate that. Oeuvre phare, like an important,
Notable.
or in a notable in a genre, or an artistic movement. So Nosferatu for German expressionism, Singing in the Rain for musical comedy. Yeah, or I don't know which. It has to be a again, notable oeuvre by an incontested master of cinema. So Vertigo by Hitchcock, or Gold Rush by Chaplin, etc.
So in that case, they're saying because the master of cinema, which is just a designation, and because it is the most notable production from that person, therefore this is.
Well, I guess like that makes it like that. It can be considered like those are movies, I guess, that they gave a 1 to. But I just I don't know. I guess I would have to read these because they do have a text that accompanies this. But usually it's weird because like these ratings are basically like distributed to every TV guide here. Like that's basically what you see. Like if you had a TV guide back in the day, like you would see these ratings in it. I don't know. It's really interesting.
That system feels unnecessarily convoluted. Like it feels like a system designated by people who pursue a PhD in a field where the only outcome of getting the PhD there is teaching other people to get the PhD there. Like if it's analytical, it's applying analytics in a way that I don't necessarily see the value in making it it's almost not like a score. It's almost like a pyramid.
Yeah.
Like they've created this like pyramid.
System. Yeah.
Yeah, like this Hall of Fame movie pyramid. It's
I don't know, like I guess, but it is interesting for like like we could debate its merits, but I do find it more interesting than what I see as the reality in video game criticism, which is it feels more like it falls into the product review side.
Yeah, the consumer report, the kind of element, which I mean is again. It's more pertinent to the video game medium because there is a lot of like, well, how well does it work? You know, which is why, again, you have that threshold of like, well, if it boots and runs, it can at least be worth a one kind of thing. That functional aspect that's much more tangible than it is with films. The projector wouldn't run. I mean, it lends itself to that consumer report type approach, which certainly has its uses. But, obviously it tends to make everything very much of the moment as well, because it's all about, how well can we expect games to work at the present time and how well does it work relative to other things? How good is the frame rate compared to other games of a similar type? How high is the resolution? How sort of advanced are the lighting effects or these sorts of things? Which is, completely divorced from the notion of let's wait several years and then see whether we think this thing is worthy of consideration for being in the sort of pantheon of the greatest in its class. That's by definition a much longer view.
Right. But it's also not a view that helps someone trying to decide if they want to buy a game for a console that's going to stop functioning in 6 years.
And again, quite aside from the nature of the medium itself, it's a question. The purchase element, the consumer report element, is I think more prized when people consume games media criticism because the games generally are far more expensive than films, and therefore there is more fear of wasting one's money. I mean that's it's like where you could go and see a film that was a bust, but how much have you lost? Well, you've lost some time and some money, but a lot of the time that might be well within the realm of an acceptable loss. But if with the equivalent transaction with a game, people might feel that a lot more severely, depending on how tight their budget is, and therefore they're much more in the market for, is this going to be worth my time and money? Because it really has to be for $70 or whatever you might say.
Right.
There's also kind of like the constant march forward of technology and time that makes me, like, personally, like, there are several old games that I put on the pedestal that if I tried to go back to them, I don't think I could. In fact, like, I've tested that, and I don't think like, just to take two examples, but like maybe like their nature kind of works against them. But Dragon Quest V and Phantasy Star 4, they're kind of two old school RPGs that I discovered late. But like at the moment that I was playing them, I had nothing but time, it seems. So I had, I managed to get through them and like really enjoyed them. And I was like, wow, like these are these gems that I should have discovered earlier, but I'm playing them now and I'm so thankful. And like definitely like these two are like now in my top 5 of RPGs of all time, alongside Chrono Trigger, etc. And then like just like a couple of years ago, I think I during the pandemic, I was like, let me revisit Dragon Quest V. And I got maybe 5 hours into it, just long enough to be reminded of a joke about this guy who's scared of frogs, whose name is Frank Ophobe.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
I was like, shit, I didn't remember that. But also, I think I've played enough of this. I don't need to keep playing. That was probably the highlight. But yeah, like it just makes me wonder, like there are some games that I truly loved and that I thought, like, I got into message board the arguments about back in the day.
That's just being a kid, though.
Yeah, I suppose so. But I don't know. I guess I've been. I don't know. I was 30. I was.
I mean, kid is all relative.
Yeah.
I do want to say though that the other thing that you mentioned, that you touched on, is like the constant march of progress of the form and of the technology that supports the forms. And how we refine the components of the game. Like even if you take out the fact that the tech gets better and we're able to do more, like we make refinements on the backs and the shoulders of games that come before. So games should get better, even if the technology doesn't, because we should understand what works and what doesn't based on the experiments that are being done by other developers before us. But you mentioned a movie and actually gave me the reaction to it that's also happening there. It was in that list of 2 movies. Birth of a Nation is a repugnantly racist film. I've watched the whole thing front to back in an academic setting. It is virulently racist.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't recommend people... Well, let me rephrase that. I don't recommend watching it as a piece of cinema. I absolutely positively recommend watching it if you are interested in cinema as an art form, but watching it with context, with contextual information about where cinema was before that. Watch like the top grossing movies before that movie comes out, and then watch them after. And you'll see what that movie did. You'll see why that movie, while we have to hold our noses while we talk about that movie, why we unfortunately still have to talk about it. Because if you go read reception of that movie, where obviously it being virulently racist wasn't as big of a deal, but if you read perception at the time, it's not the virulent racism that jumps out to the people who are writing about it in the moment. It's what it's doing that nobody was doing before. Like the production, it's that production value thing again, was so high. The concept of producing the film, those backlot films of the 30s, those really expensive ones, like Cleopatra, Queen of the Nile, which comes afterwards and is directly related to this film. I think it might have even had some of the same people working on it. It's a god-awful movie. It's fucking terrible. It's just garbage. But even now when you watch it, the production is so high. It's so intense. So much went into it. There's so much, like, especially if you've been watching in the context of films that came out around it. You can see why somebody watching it in, I think it's like 1932 or something, would have had their mind completely blown. Would have been unable to speak. That the idea that any movie could come out and compete with it in terms of quality would have been laughable. Because the production of that movie was so big that it took up a big chunk of LA for like 10 years. Because the sets were so massive that they just it would cost too much to tear them down. They eventually were burned, probably by arson. In fact, that's a B plot in, what's that Rockstar game?
LA Noire.
Yeah, that's a B plot in LA Noire. It's like, yeah, that march happened in all forms, in all artistry forms, in all television. Go back and watch early television. It's fucking terrible. It's terrible. It's got nothing redeeming about it. It really isn't until, like, I don't know, the 60s where you start to see, like, people come in with novel ideas and do stuff and bring in ideas that we didn't have previously. And those remain classics, even when you go watch them now and go, it's really not that funny. Because they pushed the limit of what people thought the medium could do. And as a consequence, they're rewarded. I do think there's an extra, like, concern for the artist in cinema and to a lesser degree television, because you can associate the work with a person. So it's not like, it's not just like a random movie. It's insert director's name here's movie. And so you get this, people who write about the art world the film world tend to be more concerned with the artist than the product in that respect. So they write a lot about the person who wrote it. They become emotionally attached to their works. and they can connect more to the meaning, the subtext. They know the mental place that artist is coming from, and they can try to intuit out. They can extract subtext, even if it's not there, because they know other things this person has produced, and they can contextualize it in that sense. Whereas video games are these big collaborative efforts. And the one place where this really happens is Kojima, and it's bullshit, because there's 8,000 other people working on his game, but he wants to make movies anyway, so he acts like he's a goddamn film director. And so I do think that also colors how reviews are written. Like they don't review it so much like a product. They're reviewing it more like an art piece, because they're reviewing it as the perspective of the director. Even if the director didn't write the goddamn thing. Like, it's not the director's words.
Well, and that's also why people really don't cringe at the nonsensical nature of his stories. Right. They're like, oh, it's Kojima. He's a visionary genius. Right.
I must get it. There probably is an Emperor's New Clothes effect in some films when certain directors, where it's like, this must be genius, because I obviously get it, and where if you actually go watch, you're like, no, this movie is just kind of a miss. We were talking about Gordon Gekko before we went live. That movie's apparently kind of a miss, because there are people who walked out of it with entirely the wrong message. But Gil, when you were mentioning it doesn't take as long to consume a film as it does a movie, I almost wanted to interject. Well, unless you're consuming a Peter Jackson film, but Peter Jackson gets away with...
Bad Taste is one of the movies that got a 7. That was given as an
example. The bottom tier, Bad Taste.
But Bad Taste would have been thrilled to get a 7.
I don't think I've ever actually seen... I remember seeing I think it was Bad Taste rather than one of the other early splatter films of his, was on TV in the UK in the 90s. I saw a few minutes and thought, this just looks like total shit.
Yeah.
Didn't watch it. So, I might have enjoyed it more if I'd, kind of got more of the actual vibe that they were going for, rather than just it seems terrible. But yeah, that's there you go.
There's things like Movie 32, which is that movie that a bunch of actors sued because they didn't realize they were, like, it's a hidden camera film. It's fucking awful. It got horrific reviews. But they made a completely self-aware... Actually, no, I have a better example. The Jackass films. Those films are completely self-aware. And the first film got pretty bad reviews. That one that just came out got remarkably, for it, high reviews. Why? Well, critics caught on to it being self-aware. And that's reflected in the reviews. It's like, oh, actually, of this type of thing that they are making, they made the pinnacle of it. And also, people died. Movie reviewers died or retired, and other people replaced them who were more in line with what the Jackass crew was doing, because they were probably kids when that show first went on the air. Like, so the forms do evolve as well. And so, like, even something that's reviewed as really horrifically bad, people can come around on. Like, I imagine that there's some David Lynch reviews that if the reviewer got a second shot at them would completely...
there's quite a number of Lynch films that were not well thought of when they came. Fire Walk with Me, the Twin Peaks prequel film, was not reviewed well by quite a few people. Lost Highway, I think, actually put the 2 thumbs down from Siskel and Ebert on the poster as a mark of pride that they didn't like it, and I like that film very much, and I imagine many critics of today probably look on it more favourably than their counterparts did in the mid-90s, although I'm sure there were definitely people that liked it then also.
I wouldn't be surprised if some of those critics, though, if given a second bite of the apple,
might even have you come around on it, maybe, possibly.
Yeah, or at least caught on to what they were doing and made a different, reach a different, or they've just softened on Lynch as a person.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, because that's what I've said, I think I've mentioned it on the air before, like, Mulholland Drive is probably my favourite film, but I don't think it's that much better than Lost Highway and Fire Walk with Me, you know what I mean? Like, so it is really weird that those films did not review that well, and yet Mulholland Drive is not just my favourite film, it's often referred to as one of the great films of the 21st century so far. It is extremely reviewed very well and continues to be regarded in the highest esteem. And it's it's a lot of the same stuff. It's him being
19-year-old
him.
me would just tell you, like, it's because of the lesbian sex scene.
Well,
So it's not that hard to figure out.
So I can give you an answer that's even more depressing than that, and it's probably true. Movie critics and cinema fucking get the biggest direction when you write about movie production.
Oh,
and
sure,
cinema.
yeah, but I mean, a lot of Lynch's stuff is, kind of fetishizes old Hollywood. That isn't anything entirely specific to Mulholland Drive, but obviously it's very nested in the film industry, in a way that the other films aren't.
That Spielberg movie right now, if you read their reviews, they're sexual. It's like, calm down. Calm fucking down. I know what Spielberg can do. I'm very aware of his strengths and weaknesses. There's no way this movie is as good as you. I get it. He wrote a movie about a love of movies. Calm down. If you made a video game about a love of video games, I think video game reviewers are probably a bit more jaded and would be like, "Are you fucking for real? What are you doing?"
You get that. You get this stuff like Suda's stuff, like kind of has some of that in there.
You're right.
Platinum stuff with like the references to Sega arcade games in the original Bayonetta, for instance. It's always like paying homage to the video games of their earlier lives or whatever. So yeah, and they will review well. Though again, if it's done the right way, that's probably
you're right.
enough.
No, you're right. It probably is. I think I don't know. What were you about to say?
Oh, just again, like, it's just stuff that I've been reading recently. But who is it? Like, Kristen Stewart, of all people, is, like, I think head of the jury for that German movie festival, the Berlinale. I don't know what it is in other languages, but anyway, and she was saying, like, she hopes that the movie that they'll pick, for the grand prize is going to be that people will disagree with it, which is not really a sense that
that is the most art for art's sake shit in the world.
Sure, but at the same time, like, it's kind of refreshing compared to video game reviews where, I don't know, there's such a again, like, this letter brought up Metacritic, and I'm not sure if that's such a good thing, Like, I'm kind of scarred by this time that I went to PAX East, and I went to this panel about, like, game reviewing, and this reviewer, like, I asked the question, like, because she said that she didn't like GTA 4, but she gave a good review to it, and I was like, well, isn't that, like, a disservice to people who read the review, would have agreed with you not liking it, like, with your reasons for not liking it, but were kind of swayed because you gave it a high score. And anyway, like, she answered that, like, yeah, but it was, like, manifestly, like, a well-made game. I couldn't give it less than
a well-made
94.
game made by professionals or whatever. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, that there is some truth to that phrase.
Yeah, there is. Something can be well crafted, but not
but like
good.
Yeah, like there's like this pressure to conform to the consensus.
I think you can review something and say, like, it's manifestly not for me, but I can evaluate the artistry and its production and still score it well. It's just my personal tastes don't align with it.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, I was playing it maybe like a few years removed, so, like, sure, like, I think there was time for games to improve in general between the time I played GTA 4 and the time that, it had come out.
If only we had an email to discuss the concept of the sort of zeitgeist, how important that is about people enjoying the game.
Should I just read that email so we can wrap that discussion in?
I mean, even at that time, though, I didn't understand the whole, like, oh yeah, GTA 4 is the godfather of video games. No.
Right.
It's not.
Well, that's
like, it's a silly...
That's hyperbole.
Yeah, it was like, so silly.
No, Metroid Prime... was the Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
It's the Citizen's Kane, except the climax scene is 32 minutes long.
Right. But GTA 4 had an Oscar-worthy story.
If you actually
I agree because it was the story of several Oscar-winning movies.
Exactly.
It's factually accurate. You know, if you complete Metroid Prime with 100% scans, 100% items, and fast enough, when she takes off a helmet, it just says Rosebud.
Oh, good.
Yes.
I thought maybe it just told you that you played a significant game and just walked away.
Just says significant
William
on the
Randolph
screen.
Hearst hates this game.
I mean, he might. Have you asked him? You don't know. I actually think the comment you pulled out from Christian Stewart just comes off as incredibly pretentious.
Yeah.
Well, yes and no.
can.
Like the context,
No,
there
it's
was
like
some
the
context.
absolutely
the best
pretentious.
art
but I
makes
mean,
you uncomfortable.
Like she's talking about like these movies from filmmakers who, you know, from other countries, like from countries that are actively the crapper right now, you know, like kind of rebelling against their government, or you know, like the social situations are happening there. So, you know, like there's kind of more this view that movies or art should challenge people, should, you know, and I like this idea.
But that's
that,
not. But so what was the exact quote again?
Well, I don't have the exact quote.
But
I'm translating it back from English.
I don't know.
Okay.
You could construe it a few different ways, I suppose. But it may be the sort of notion that, because especially when it's, you know, you've got a jury, so it's multiple people coming together to, you know, make a selection for the grand prize. You know, do you end up just picking the thing that's the most agreeable amongst those people? And then it's like, well, it is the most agreeable. It's got the fewest people that are like, no, I can't get behind that because it's got this wrong with it. It's got that wrong with it. You know, versus like something that people actually passionately believe is really good. But then other people have, are not, struggle to get behind it. Like, I guess it's kind of a process thing. It's like, well, we'd rather have something where actually, you know, it isn't just the most agreeably nice film that we've, kind of passed judgment over in this process. It's the thing that generates the most kind of, passionately sort of positive reaction, even if there's like negatives that come with that. It could be, I don't think it has to be pretentious. I'm not saying it isn't either. It might just be a sort of a process point of view, you know what I mean?
I'm kind of, maybe I'm misremembering things, but I was surprised when a couple of episodes ago, James, you brought up the movie Little Miss Sunshine as a positive, because I feel like that movie kind of took its nubs from like in the hindsight from people who were like, well, that wasn't such a good movie, was it? But it was, I think that it was like one of those like safe, kind of agreeable choices. Like, well, this has a little bit of everything, of something for everyone. I don't know that it was
that safe. There's definitely stuff in there that's less safe than.
Yeah, well, Alan Arkin probably, you know, there should be a warning in general ahead of his movies, but. I don't know what joke I'm making here. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't either. You've lost me completely.
Alan Arkin, unsafe for all audiences. I don't know.
Have we lost the zeitgeist of this email?
Alan Arkin is unsafe. There you go.
The sound of furious typing. I think we need to stop.
Probably.
I think we need to stop in general, but I think we need to stop this email in particular. We're at an hour 40. This was supposed to be the fast email this time. Oh, I mean, this is a good conversation, but this was supposed to be the quick email. This was supposed to be the one we get through real fast.
Someone had to read off all the ones, the 1.5s.
That wasn't me. That wasn't me. I didn't do it.
Hey. That wasn't the majority of time.
No, it really wasn't. I know.
It wasn't.
Sorry, John. You're quite right.
No, but I'll take whatever Fall Guy I can get. I know I did the most talking here, but that's because I was passionate about it. Also, I got called out by name, so I'm allowed to.
Yep, that's it. Cheat anybody that wants to call out James in the future. He will filibuster you into the fucking ground.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Please, think of us.
You don't talk anyway, John. What difference does it make?
Well, I'm not talking about the bullshit current version of the filibuster either. I'm talking old school.
That's right. I will stand there and recite every one out of 10 movie I've ever seen, which is way too many. I wouldn't even give the movie where somebody gives birth out of a pouch as a 1 out of 10. But that's just 'cause Christopher Lee's in it.
I thought that was Howling 3, whereas Christopher Lee's in Howling 2.
Right.
I've seen neither of these films, but I know
Score's
that
dropping,
from
you're right.
you.
That's right. He's in Howling 2. Howling 2's the one where your sister's a werewolf. Is how he greets somebody. It's so good.
Sometimes you just, you got to tell the hardest truth first, isn't it?
Oh, with such good delivery. All right. Well, at least we can call this episode "Howling 2: Your Sister's a Werewolf."
I was going to say "Looking for the Contours of Fun" was my vote early on, but that works also.
All right, Guillaume, anything else you want to say? I felt like I cut you off, and I feel bad about it.
No, I mean, I think we can conclude by saying that we all agree that Crash was the best movie of 2004.
Oh, fuck.
Well, I'd rather watch Cronenberg's Crash.
Jesus. All right. Well, on that, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I guess we'll do some new business. We got to figure that out. So stay tuned and find out when we find out. We are back. We're going to do a little bit of new business. I want to handle a little bit first with Guillaume. So, Guillaume, are you by any chance still playing Blue Dragon?
No, I'm not, James.
Oh, well, that's a shame. All right, well, moving on. Let's talk about something else that came out as a consequence of the Direct. We're going to dig in a little bit on the Metroid Prime. What's the official title of this thing?
Just Remastered, which
Remastered?
arguably might kind of undersell what it is in some ways. I guess it really depends on your personal experience with, games and how they, tend to market themselves. So oftentimes the Remastered is like in the pun territory, where it's like, we can't just say remastered, it's got to be remastered.
Right. I mean, a lot of times that just means like
Metroid stirred.
Yeah,
we did
if there'd been that sensibility at work, perhaps that's what we would have been given here. But no, it's just remastered, and I think before it came out. Before we knew about it, which was, at the same time, basically, it's kind of said like, if there's anything to the notion that, they will release, some amount of old Metroid Prime games to prepare for, at this point, what can only still be considered theoretical fourth Metroid Prime game, then, don't bet on it being all three of them, mostly because of the experience of like Galaxy 2 just being kind of forgotten about. And the thing about that is with those 3D All-Star, that package, like the kind of remastering that's going on there is comparatively slight. It's more of a just up-resed version. And they still didn't put Galaxy 2 in the damn thing. If you were talking about the level of graphical kind of overhaul, that if you told me then that it's like, this is what we're talking about in terms of the amount of like new geometry that they've done for the environment, as well as totally like redoing the lighting and then improving the textures and all that kind of stuff, then I think I would have said like, definitely don't expect 2 and 3 just yet. I guess maybe it could be theoretically still possible if, this did well enough or something, but, it really, there's been, as soon as I saw it, I think the thing that struck me was the lighting. And on balance, that's still kind of the most striking thing about it, is just how much it adds to it was always a strength of the game, relative to its peers, at the time, was this feeling of, the sense of place, and that it had, obviously it's, quite fantastical in its own way, but that it was immersive, in its detail and its sort of relatively assiduous construction. The lighting being so much more kind of convincing and natural, even in these weird locations, really enhances that, because especially the feeling of like natural light coming in a shaft through, a gap in a ceiling or a window or breaks in the trees or stuff, compared then with the kind of various other kind of non-sunlight sources, whether it's like, kind of little artificial lights in the mines or the glow of the phazon itself or whatever. Like, it all feels different, and that just makes it so much more rich and believable. This environment's like, that is the main thing. But if you watch comparison videos like I did, like the one that NWR's YouTube channel put out with John Red and kind of looking at it, like I probably underestimated how much they've done with the geometry. Like, it's so much better, it's so much different. Like when you have like overgrown trees or stuff like that, like it's like, oh yeah, wow, this again, because it's a game played many times, but not really played through it or played it for any significant amount of time, probably far past 2011. So that's still quite some time ago. And it is a case of like, yeah, you remember it being this rich environment, but, they've really put a lot of work in to kind of make the game live up to that memory with this remaster.
John?
Yeah.
So you just went from a major remaster of a moody, atmospheric, corridor-based shooting game.
That's the, I guess that's like a full-on remake, and this is almost, it's a little bit in between, isn't it? Because it's like, it's substantively the same game, but the graphical overhaul is a little bit more into remake territory than, again, like just your up-resing of Galaxy or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think what really surprised me was how modern it feels, and just how much I could just kind of pick it up and run with it, and how much it felt like just like your typical first person shooter kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I thought it looks really good for what it is. I mean, I don't think I thought the original game looked great. It's just a very smooth game to play, and it just goes to show that, to me, that I think the art direction of the game is really good and stands up. I haven't looked at any kind of side-by-side comparisons, but yeah, I mean, it still has a very unique, art, a very unique visual look to it. I think the soundtrack is excellent.
It's always right.
Yeah.
The sound design in general, I'd say, all the various sound effects and, kind of it all feels, again, it just gives it a great sort of sense of place and, that everything's kind of happening, because it's really quite, or certainly was for its day, again, like really detailed in that way.
Yeah, and you realize how influential it was in games that came afterwards that cribbed a lot of its elements, like scanning stuff and doing that kind of thing. You play it and you think, oh yeah, well of course I can walk around and scan stuff. But when this game was released, that wasn't normal. You didn't do that in first person shooters.
No.
But
you didn't jump in first person shooters or platform either.
No,
not the same way.
Well, for times I suppose specifically from a Nintendo hardware owner's point of view, we wished we did it less in Turok games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But but that's the thing. Like
this whole thing led to Nintendo kind of trying to manage expectations, or by calling it a FPA, a first-person adventure, as opposed to
first-person adventure. We should honor them by making sure we maintain that phrasing. So we should.
To be fair, I think they did that very, like, that was a concerted effort to put that messaging out there. Like, do not expect this to be a shooter. Do not play it like a shooter when you get to play it. But I feel like like the fans and the media of the time were very compliant with that wish. Like that was effectively a bit of marketing, that they put out there, and it was, that message got through and was sort of repeated very thoroughly, so it was, I guess it was pretty effective, I think, insofar as it could be.
Yeah, I mean, It's a first-person shooter. You play it now, and you're like, "Oh, this is a first-person shooter with certain elements that aren't normally in first-person shooters. And most first-person shooters, you can't roll around like a ball.
No, there's especially some of the more complex, like mazes and, kind of, like with the magnetic, spider ball, like stuff and all that. You're almost doing like little time platform challenges as the ball, or you're rolling around in the half pipe with the boost and all that. Like, it's really quite involved. I mean, it only would get more so in the sequels. They added more things that the ball could do, and they came up with more kind of, advanced level design for it. But, it's true. There is a significant amount of stuff in here that was, is still odd for a game that, most people would look at and think of, in a first person shooter context. But I think the thing about today is what an FPS can be has obviously been explored a lot more than what it had been back then, back then. Even though you'd had stuff like GoldenEye, obviously we talked about just recently with that coming out on the NSO, somewhat expanded, like the idea of what an FPS could be in the first, single player, context, in terms of like, we've got, mission objectives and stuff. It's not just a corridor game where you kill stuff until you can go to the next room. But that was still very much a process, and Metroid Prime was like blew a big hole in like, okay, you could do a lot of things in the first person sort of paradigm. It doesn't have to be just, what people think of when they thought of like PC shooters in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, this is not too long after stuff like Turok 2, for example, which was 1998.
Not too far away either. Like, it's like these are some of the same people.
Yeah, the overlap between Iguana and Retro, being Texas, exactly.
Yeah, so this game was really a huge leap forward, and it feels right up there. Like I've played, relatively recently. I've played like Doom 3, for example, which came out I think in 2004, and it doesn't feel as advanced as this game does. If that makes sense. Like it feels more. It doesn't feel as experimental. It's more of a straight-ahead first-person shooter.
Oh, no, and it would be like that's.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's Doom, but at the same time, it came out 3 years after this, and it almost feels older than Metroid Prime, if you know what I mean.
Well, and that game was also going for a little bit of a retro nostalgia thing with the old Dooms because it had been a while.
Yeah.
I do think it's Metroid, and I say this as somebody who doesn't really like Metroid Prime that much. At all, actually. I don't care for that game. I like 3. I think 3 feels really nice. And 2, bleh. But what I find really interesting is that it does have a bunch of stuff that it contributed to the form. And we kind of talk about, RE4 the same way, where it didn't necessarily seek out it's not even necessarily a member of the cover shooter genre that came after it. But it laid out a bunch of pieces and building blocks that somebody else came back and reassembled into a different gameplay style. And it's a lot. I mean, we talked about it in the previous segment. I don't want to go back there. I'm remiss to go back there. But people try out stuff in a product and they leave behind breadcrumbs, and that stuff can get picked up and played with and expanded and extracted and reoriented and become something that the person who threw it out there never even occurred to them, and maybe promoted to the core feature. And I think Metroid Prime does a bunch of that. I mean, I remember there was a Star Wars game set in the Episode 3 era on Xbox and PC.
It's just like the Commando one or something.
Yeah, yeah, where it's like you're just a bunch of clone troopers, and it takes place right as the order to kill the Jedi kicks in. So like it's that like that's the middle part of the game. So that game doesn't feel anything like Metroid Prime at all. It's not even in the slightest. But there's a lot of cues, including the fact that you're looking through a visor that's got stuff projected all over it, how the doors work, how you interact with stuff. That is clear these people played Metroid Prime a lot. And that like I think that contributes to why when you see some of this stuff, some of these effects are still really cool, and so it doesn't feel quite so old. Whereas the things that took cues from Doom, they're more foundational. They're not like expanding out what the franchise, what the genre is. I guess I don't know. I lost the plot on what I was trying to say.
Yeah, it's a little bit tough to make kind of like claims about like what games led to what change or what what it inspired, because the world of PC first person games is pretty vast, and like even before Doom, like there's always been dungeon crawlers and like those kind of at the same time as Doom was coming out, and John Romero amongst probably the others in the team as well, like they were into RPGs and stuff like that, and they had projects for RPGs as well, and that didn't turn out. But there was stuff like Ultimate Underworld that was first person. It didn't play like Doom, but it was the same kind of first person action, just but it was dungeon crawling, but you did have an inventory. It was real time, but it was not. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this, but like System Shock was System Shock 2 was 1999, so 3 years before Metroid Prime. Again, like fairly different, but it was trying things in terms of immersion and not just being a Doom clone. I think that after a few years, the skin replacements for Doom taper out, and developers try something a little bit more, like it's not just Heretic and Hexen, like, oh, let's put a medieval fantasy skin on this. Like they actually try out stuff.
It's a brand new game. What are you talking about?
Like Thief was 1998, so before
Feels
System
right.
Shock 2, I think. And so that was all about like stealth. Like, what if instead of first-person shooter, we had a first-person sneaker or something? Didn't catch on. Also, it was the same acronym.
That would have
That
had
sounds
the
like
additional...
a Peter Molyneux prompt.
Possibly. But it also has
definitely
the
does.
additional problem of still being FPS as
Right, yeah.
abbreviation.
But so obviously, like, I'm not trying to diminish what Metroid Prime brought.
No.
But I feel like some of the things that we attribute to it could also be kind of like the natural conclusion or
Convergent evolution is the biological term for it.
Yeah, like, oh, I want to make this this game as immersive as I can. It's already in first person. What else can we do to make it more immersive? Well, like, okay, my character is wearing a helmet, like giving helmet effects.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have said that way.
Give me these helmet effects, y'all.
Yeah. So
on the bright side, you're giving me titles, so that's great.
Yeah, great. But yeah, so that seems like maybe it could have been like independently arrived at,
Sure. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
And some other developers did something else. Like, if their character didn't have a helmet, well, they were like, well, we don't want a HUD for our game. What if instead we made our character a woman, and you look down at her breast, at her tattoo of a heart, to see it depleting, and that's the HUD to tell you that her health is going down.
Okay, could you... if this theoretical game had a name, would you by chance be able to theoretically tell me what it is?
Sure, Trespasser.
Great. I'm gonna go buy that right now. That sounds amazing.
It's based on the Jurassic Park franchise, if you can believe it or not.
Oh, never mind. I'm out. It's Jurassic Park video game.
Well, it's very janky.
Yeah, I said it's a Jurassic Park video game.
It's one of those games that some people are trying to what's the word?
Oh,
reclaim,
this is the one. This is the one that had the lenticular box cover, right?
Isn't that all PC games from that era?
No. No, this one, the entire box cover was like a raptor. Okay. And you could like turn it and it would look like, coming at you.
Anyway, apparently it tried some interesting things, but it failed at pulling them off. Also, that's a pretty stupid idea that I described. But
it sounds amazing.
The point is, like retro, like they managed to Yeah, like to think of like interesting things to do to zig where other shooters were zagging, and also they pulled it off, which was not easy.
It's always trying out experiments and seeing what sticks. And yeah, you're right. This could be Convergent Evolution. It could be somebody played Metroid Prime and loved it. But just getting there first or getting noticed first in that space is the significance, I suppose. Because ultimately it doesn't really matter who, if it was a borrowed idea or, there are obviously situations where the idea is like, oh, you've just straight taken this. I'm looking directly at you, Genshin Impact, that looks like fucking Breath of the Wild. But that's actually a bad example. The Ubisoft one about Greece is a more pressing.
Immortals, was
Immortals Rising, or
it's no. Like, okay, all right, calm down. But to John's point though, which led us down this whole tangent of just like how it still feels new. It may be more that they haven't come up with something that replaces it either.
Yeah, well, certainly there hasn't been an original Prime game since 07. So
there's been an original Prime number though. It's 4, ironically enough.
Sure, yeah, but that's part of it. I think it feels a little relatively fresh, compared to certain other sort of genres or series, that Nintendo's been dealing in over that time. But it's tough. It's tough for me to evaluate how well it holds up or how much other people would like it, because it is one of these games that I've played so very thoroughly. The first time, I've definitely the first time round, it's at the end of 02 and early 03. But even, times after that on GameCube and then on the trilogy on Wii, I've just completely lost the ability to say, well, what if I didn't know roughly what to do? Kind of thing. It's difficult to, in fact, there's some things, especially things that just stick out in my memory from playing it back then that you can look at it, it's kind of evaluating, some drawbacks with it. Because that's the thing, I did, absolutely adore the game. Very much so, but as generally my way with things, especially, around that time, the things that I really, really loved, I just would wring absolutely every last bit of enjoyment out of it. To the point that you really did end up seeing the things that weren't so good about it, and then you could, you end up remembering the things that it lacked, quite a lot, quite vividly, compared to other games that maybe you liked, but you just didn't, kind of play to exhaustion the way I did with this. It's funny. It brought back a lot of memories, and funnily enough, a lot of memories of that original playthrough, because I was wondering, I played this game probably in, 05, 06, 10, 11, through the trilogy and stuff. So it's like, what is it going to bring back memories of? And it was very much that first time playing it that it reminded me of, especially I think because I went with basically the control scheme that is the original control scheme, but with gyro aiming as well. Which, I just thought, well, I really like the trilogy controls, and if I play this again, I might use the dual stick, just to see, okay, how does this function as a sort of, a kind of standard FPS control game now. But for this one, I kind of wanted to go back to that original feel. With the controls, just to, again, put myself more in those shoes and kind of evaluate it as best I could. How well that original design holds up. And, bringing back all those memories, one of the things it reminded me of is going to see the Two Towers in the cinema, because that was the same Christmas that I played this. And it's very much the same with that movie or those Lord of the Rings movies. I love those movies intensely. They're some of my favourite films ever. However, I can also, vividly tell you all the lines that Gimli has that are just dreadful. That I wish weren't there.
But it's the same thing. It's the same feeling for me, though.
Effects or, all the stuff that sucks, I remember. Really
but it's the same sort of thing, though, where much like the Lord of the Rings movies, where I was so blown away by seeing that world brought to life so well.
Sure. I mean,
Metroid Prime is exactly that. I just remember, especially going through when I first started playing, and you're going through that first area where everything is on fire, and the dead parasite queen is there, and it's just this kind of feeling like, holy crap, what is even going on here? What, it's like, I just remember this, it's just like this magical feeling of going through that scene of this world that you had only seen kind of like a cardboard cutout of, all of a sudden just realized completely, totally fleshed out in front of you.
I mean, I think there's a few things that went into that, not only just the skill in the execution, but also the fact that, it had been relatively a long time since Super Metroid. Obviously, Fusion came out at roughly the same time. So there was that, and I did play Fusion first. I played that portably and then held off on Metroid Prime until I was off, for the Christmas term break from university. So Fusion did come first, but still, it was kind of like, it's been all these years. In retrospect, it's not that many fucking years.
Right.
8.5 years or whatever when you're a young man, as I was then, still a teenager. That was a long time. And,
time hadn't compressed yet.
Yeah, so it was this sort of thing, it's been away for so long, and that, Super Metroid was so amazing, and then it's like, we've had Ocarina of Time, we've had Super Mario 64, but we haven't had Metroid, and it's like, how well can they do it, and all the drama about, it's this studio from Texas, and it's troubled, all the other projects that got cancelled, and they've had, they've redesigned the game, and they put it in first person, and all this, it was a saga. It was a saga you don't get a lot of with Nintendo, because it's very much a closed box with, a lot of their development stuff. But because it was happening in America, that's which again, was not that common, around this time with a major Nintendo game. The press had more access, and more things got out. So this whole saga of is it going to be any good at all? Is it going to do any kind of justice to this series that I had a lot of affection for? And then when the reviews started coming in, it was like, oh wow. What, really did they really nail it? And then when I finally got to play it, that early section, which is not identical, but it's clearly going for a kind of the feel of the beginning of Super Metroid with where Ridley steals the baby Metroid, but obviously, like you said, whereas you got the flat sprites and all that, and it did a creditable job at the time. With this again, and the remake brings it so much more vividly to life. But with the for the time, the lighting and kind of scanning everything and seeing all these this place that clearly everything's gone wrong in and all that. It was very vivid. It was very immersive and stuff. So it brings, the remake brings all that stuff back to you, but also I think especially the lighting, it does enhance it quite a lot. The best description I could give is when you see concept art for a game, and it looks way cooler than what it ended up being in the game. A lot of the time, I think lighting is a big part of that. It's this beautifully painted image, and they've gone for this really evocative way that the image is sort of staged almost. And then when you're actually in it in 3D. It can't be like that, right? Because, it has to work from every angle and all that. But what they've got with these sort of preset lighted scenes it's almost like looking at the concept art. It's that kind of vivid and evocative, but it works, from all the angles and stuff. It's just, I'm really, really impressed with that. But I guess in terms of the negative, some of the negative things coming back, there's a portion in the game in the wrecked frigate that falls, to the planet, where basically you have not got the gravity suit that lets you go through the water. If you haven't got that suit yet to go through the water, it still lets you go really, really far into that frigate. Like, there's this, big chain of platforms that are very, very close together, very kind of slightly higher each than the last, building a staircase. That means even if you don't have the jumping ability associated with the suit for the water, you could go quite far. And so I remember this when I saw it this time, having just gone there with the gravity suit. It's like, oh, there's the energy tank they give you for like making this ridiculously arduous slog through the water when you shouldn't be able to. And that's it. That's what you get, And it's like, I just always remember that being like, yeah, I think that is, I get it in a sense. It's just like, okay, like if you kind of push the boundaries of what you're able to do, you get this energy tank early. Like you can look at it that way. But really, I feel like it contravenes one of the things that I think Metroid, and it's a push and pull with Metroid, right? Because the whole thing about Metroid is it has to give you like strategically crafted dead ends. That's the whole point of the game.
Right.
It's like you go so far, or so far in one particular direction versus another, and then you find, it is a dead end for now because I don't have X or Y. But how far you could actually go, I'm sure I did say this on the show probably when we did like the trilogy in New Business, or maybe when it was considered for the Game of the Decade stuff or whatever. Like for me, it lets you go too far down dead ends in the first one before it kind of tells you it's time. Because the thing about it is, in proportional terms, I think it's a little bit different in first person, where you're kind of plodding along, than it is in 2D, where especially like once you get things like speed boost, but even just the basic maneuverability of Samus, with like holding the run button in something like Super Metroid, like you get around pretty fast. It's just, of course you do. It's just nowhere near as disorientating as it would be, in first person, just going crazily fast. Not to mention the performance ramifications of that. So, like, that was the one thing that I stuck. It brought, as soon as I got to the wrecked ship this time and saw that energy tank, it's like, oh yeah, that's it. That's the shit consolation prize that they give you if you were dumb enough to come here. And I was in 2000. If you were dumb enough to say, well, look, these platforms are really close together. They clearly are allowing me to go this far, so they must want me to go this far. And then you get to that energy tank and it just says, like, no, you just can't advance. That's what it's saying to you at that point. You can't go any further. But have an energy tank for coming this far, you plum.
Good job.
So
we're very proud of you.
There's the odd other example of that, kind of in the mines and stuff as well, where it's just like, it cannot be a perfect, like, you never, waste a step or whatever. That's not Metroid. You have, the whole essence is pushing at the boundaries, seeing what you can make progress with, what you can't, earmarking it in your brain for later to come back, all that stuff. But it just, with the pace of the game, which has not changed in the remaster really at all. I mean, I think maybe with like some of the customization of the controls and stuff, like you could probably turn faster and stuff, but in terms of like actually how quickly you travel, hasn't changed. They really could have used with, reining some of those things in a bit, because, I just think, when you have something like that where it's like, well, they let me believe, I could keep going, and it would, lead to something when it really didn't. It kind of colours how you look at other parts of the game as well. So it's like, is this going to be something worth investigating? I think it's one of the hardest things about doing a game of this type right. It's like, so having these almost like seemingly redundant spaces that, are just long enough to kind of give you the feeling of like, what am I going to find here? But not so long that it makes you resent the fact that they made you do it. And this just gets on the wrong side of that line here there.
Which is funny because Nintendo's open world games lately, you go back to like Xenoblade X, have really effectively said that the path that you can wander down goes forever. It goes as long as you want. You could end up on the wrong continent if you keep walking. And in a weird way, that feels nice. Like I just end up in places that I don't expect to be. But yeah, you're right. I remember that feeling distinctly in Prime, and maybe it's about that first person, as you talked about, where it's like walking in first person, it feels so much slower.
It does feel slow, and I think there's also a couple of spots where your save point is far away from where you need to be.
Oh yeah,
Right.
no, that's true.
And you gotta walk back.
Slog your way all the way through and go through a whole bunch of, morph ball mazy kind of areas and avoid all these monsters.
Respawning enemies. I mean, there's definitely some misjudgments, like the Chozo ghosts that come. Like it's like you got the first area essentially, other than the kind of quasi hub Talon overworld, is the Chozo ruins, and so like you have like essentially one phase of the game that goes through that. You fight a big boss there, the plant one. And you're kind of done with that area for a bit, but then you come back later, and they felt well, we've got to scale it up a bit, like I guess they didn't feel like at this point you'd have the better weapons, you'd have more missiles, you'd have more health, so they kind of had to we've got to bring new enemies in to kind of make it so that you're being challenged by the enemies, but that inevitably bogs down exploration, which you definitely want to go faster when it's a place that you're coming back to. Like retraversal, you want it to be faster. And of course, generally it is in Metroid because they give you things that make you able to skip sections. Like, now I can grapple over this lava pit rather than walk around it, or, so they do that. But putting these enemies in with the Chozo ghosts and stuff, it's like, I get why they did it, but it does slow things down. But here's the real problem. They keep coming back. Like, if it was a one-time thing where it's like, okay, we're going to repopulate these rooms you've been in before with these enemies that you haven't fought before, and you kind of need a visor to see them all the time. So that, it's teasing something for later in the game, and it's just something to kind of spice it up for now. If that just happened once per room, and it was done, then, that would be one thing. But the fact that it's just like, sometimes, especially when you're wandering around trying to find something, it's like you go in a room, you fight the bloody things, you go off a couple of rooms down, I go, nah, you know what, I'm barking up the wrong tree, let's go back. And then you come back, and they're back! And the music changes, and they're screeching, and it's just like, we didn't need this all the time. So, and you definitely get even when you're super, super powerful and the enemies really can't touch you anymore, so they're much more easy to ignore. And there's not many cases where you literally have to kill enemies to make a door open. So to its credit.
But you can't bypass the same way you can in a 2D game, though, by just going over them. At least not
it's certainly not as easy, because you don't have like a space jump in this game, or a screw attack, or like we just when you're like at the apex of your powers. Even when you are as kitted out as you're going to get in this game, the enemies can still be pests, because it's like if you're trying to explore for items. You try to listen for that sound that gives away that there's an item in the room. Enemies screeching at you all the time is not very helpful. And also, they'll mess things up. Like if you're trying to do platforming and they shoot you midair, you could fall down. If you're trying to do some morph ball thing and they shoot you while you're on a rail, you can fall off. So you end up dealing with them. And the way that you deal with them a lot of the time is, you have to have the right beam or have the right visor or both, and it's all fiddly and it all kind of, just bogs things down a little bit. And I think that's, one of the things that probably, I think that was less the case with something like Prime 3. There was less of that kind of, it wasn't as, the kind of requirements for getting to the end game were not as onerous as the artifact thing is in this, which is still, I mean, compared to its contemporary, the Triforce Hunt, I mean, it's positively user friendly, but, that's not the most, that's faint praise if ever there was. But yeah, I think also in those games, in Prime 3, like I felt a bit more powerful at the end and you could just like blow past things. In this, the enemies are there to be fiddly, and they are, so it does bog things down a little bit, but they're still. So the thing is, it all brings those things back, those sorts of memories of trying to 100% the game and playing it on hard where everything's more of a damage sponge and all this kind of stuff. But it also brings back a hell of a lot of great memories, of just how impactful it was and just all the things that, still really hold up about it. I think it's still the most kind of, obviously, Metroid Prime 3 didn't even try. It had separate planets. And then 2, you have the 2 dimensions and the fact that one of them is entirely purple. This is the one that is like a whole world that has, it's got your fire area, your ice area, all that, it's still pretty video gamey, but it feels like it could be one place and that you are making your way through it. And even though it makes you make your way through it because there's no fast travel and stuff, the way that all the interconnections end up coming into play, it feels like you've kind of mastered it by saying, you know what, no, I can get in, if I need to go from this area to another, which originally was separated by many hours of gameplay, there's actually a quick way for me to do it now, if I really understand how everything connects together. And at that sense, I don't think they ever really quite got better at than this one.
Johnny, do you want to wrap up with, or you want to pick it up next week?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up this week. Emails. I want them. Even though it took us an hour and a half to get through one of them this week, I want your emails. John, what is the email address they can send emails to?
It is rfn@nintendoworld.com. Nintendo
No.
World Report. Jesus. rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. That is rfn@nintendoworldreport.com.
So the reason I asked you was somebody in the Discord accused me of not giving you the opportunity to say it, and my response was, he'll get it wrong, and I was told, trust him.
I have gotten it right. I've actually never, that is the first time I've ever gotten it wrong.
That's not true!
Yes, I have gotten it wrong on purpose.
That's the first time I've gotten it wrong.
Times.
Not true. Okay, well,
many
this is
times.
the first time.
But that is the first time I have actually botched the landing when trying to do it legitimately.
God help me. Dear listener, pray for me. Greg, what's our music for this week?
Well, I thought a few days after this is released, I think it's the 21st of February, the anniversary, the 30th anniversary for the release of the first in the Star Fox series, will be upon us. So it came out on that date in Japan, back in 1993, and I just thought it might be nice to find something to close us out on that theme, which I've always been a bit more inclined towards the original Star Fox's kind of musical style than 64, even though there's definitely some very good stuff in the 64 soundtrack. But we have used some things from the original Star Fox soundtrack before, so I was like, well, where can we go? But there was in the 90s a kind of series of like orchestral game concerts and I guess accompanying CD albums that went on. And I think quite a few of the sort of arrangements that they had for Nintendo stuff in those ended up essentially being just picked up wholesale for the music in Smash Bros. Melee a few years later. Definitely like the Kirby stage one in that is like clearly very, very similar. Either that was a case of convergent evolution or they just, went and picked that up. But, the kind of, the treatment they have for the Star Fox original, kind of theme from the Super Nintendo game is pretty much perfect, as you'd expect, because obviously that's exactly what they were going for. in the original Star Fox using, the Super Nintendo, Sony sample-based sound hardware that, at the time made it relatively well suited to doing things that were akin to a symphonic score for a movie. And this was very much patterned after, John Williams style of score, as you might imagine. So it's a shame that the series, after having, one original game has come out in the past, I want to say, 17 years, and that was a game at the arse end of a console that was pretty much DOA, and it didn't even particularly land well given those circumstances. With a lot of people who play Star Fox may well be a thing of the past at this point as a series, but 30 years ago it was the future, and it was pretty damn cool.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Well, with that, it is time for us to go. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Later.
Bye-bye.